So it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce my good friend, Dr. Felicity McCallum, who is an Awabakaleen, a woman of Abwa, with cultural and spiritual responsibilities to her Indigenous community. She lives on traditional Awabakal country northwest of what is now Sydney, Australia. Like many in her country, she claims both Indigenous and Celtic ancestors. She serves as lecturer at Australian Catholic University and as an adjunct lecturer at Charles Sturt University as part of the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture. As well as being an activist for national reconciliation, she offers a leading public voice on matters of faith and Indigenous issues in Australia. She is a member of the ongoing monthly Loving Mimesis Generative Dialogue group, of which I am part, and a member of the Colloquium on Violence and Religion, which studies Renee Girard. So Felicity participated in the Theology&Peace September mini conference on creative mimesis and the practice of gentle action, and then our subsequent follow-up discussion session in October, offering her Indigenous and theological perspective on the material generated there. And we had really good responses at both of those from the audience. This talk gives her a chance to present at more length the specific history and social and political situation of Australia, showing us models for how creative mimesis and gentle action are at work, even in situations of violent cultural oppression and Indigenous suffering. She offers both stories of hopeful moments in days after European first contact with Indigenous people, as well as ways to move forward to the present, in the present toward reconciliation. Her work shows us how Girard helps us both powerfully name the workings of violent colonialism, but also the alternative of loving cooperation and mutual respect for each other, land, sea, and stories vital to Indigenous values. Both are relevant to truth-telling and healing, not only in Australia, but as a model for other lands as well. So I first met Felicity 5 years ago during the pandemic year when African-American religion scholar Julia Robinson Moore, some of you may know her, and I first formed a monthly Zoom discussion group on loving or creative mimesis. We did that after a Theology&Peace online conference because our conversation was so generative. And then we were joined by both Felicity and conflict studies theorist Vern Redekop, who is here also. We represent 3 different countries and cultures, and the group has provided a place of mutual support as we each pursue Girardian-inspired research projects. We call ourselves the Loving Mimesis Generative Dialogue Group. Today's talk draws from research Dr. McCallum conducted as a part of her dissertation, or thesis, she may call it, for her recent PhD in Theology and Indigenous Studies at Charles Sturt University in Canberra, Australia. So please welcome Dr. Felicity McCallum.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's really wonderful to be here. And so I'm just going to bring up the slides from the beginning. Hopefully everybody can see the beginning now. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. So yes, I'm an Awabakal woman, or the word for that is Awabakaleen, and I am sitting on Awabakal land right now. Awaba, the lake, which the word is used or comes from in our ancient language, is about maybe 100 meters from where I'm sitting right now. So I'll use the language of this place, which is, well, it comes from 60,000 years of continuous civilization, the oldest civilizations on Earth, continuous civilizations. And our particular part is on the coast, so it's at least 11,800 years old, back to the Ice Age. So Bo Waika Ka Kiliko Awabikal. I acknowledge the ancestors of the Awabakal, and I welcome everybody to our gathering today. So the presentation is a discussion to do with creative and loving mimesis, gentle action, that has had an extraordinarily powerful effect in producing the capacity for peace and for productive and constructive civil society in the whole nation of Australia. And key to that is a relationship between two people, Biraban, who is one of my ancestors, who is Indigenous through the Awabakal lines, and a missionary from London called Lancelot Edward Threlkeld. So here on the page, we can see Waibagamba, which is more commonly known as Nobbies. It's a headland which Captain Cook, the so-called discoverer, first invader of Australia, noted in his journals in 1770 as he was moving down the coast. And to the right of there, we see Newcastle Port, which is a very important port in Australia, and I'll speak more about that a little bit later. So today we're going to look at the history of the violent colonialism in Australia. We're going to look at the constructive ways that mimesis has usurped or has superseded that for a fulfillment of the prayer of these two very crucial models that we're talking about today. And then we're going to talk about a much broader scope of where we are now as the nation of Australia. So here we have the visual presentations of the gentlemen that I am going to be pointing to today. The first one is Reverend Lancelot Edward Threlkeld, and the second one is Biraban. Biraban has a second name, an English name. That name was the soldier's name who took Biraban from Awabakal country to the Sydney barracks. And that was a custom that was done in the times where our folk were given or imposed upon by a name from the people who were English who'd come into the milieu. And so that's something of another conversation that we can have at some stage to do with identity and the importance and the sacredness of names. So the meeting of two worlds, we have importantly in the combustive joy of this relationship, which I'll deepen our analysis of, we have this fulfillment of the past, present, future continuum. And when I reference that, I'd just like you to just just muse over the notion that for First Peoples in Australia, and I'm not sure if it's the same as First Peoples elsewhere, but I have a hunch it is, past, present, future is all here at once. And so when we have this sort of dimensional perception as human beings on Earth, a lot of times we refer to what's going on almost as if it's only three-dimensional. And yet from an Indigenous point of view, it's literally five-dimensional, because there's a capacity to sense through contemplative action what the forward and receptive trends are that have brought about what you're experiencing in the present. Now, Lancelot Edward Threlkeld and Biraban lived a relationship of friendship that was mutually affirming and that was honoring of the equality of their humanity. And in that relationship, there was the rumination, the kind of the granulation of a prayer that this could be the way that people could live on this continent in the future. And in that way, it's a past, present, future continuum that they were actually enacting. So in this presentation, we're going to go backwards and forwards a little bit. And as we allow the movement to move backward and forward, I'm hoping that your experience might be a sense of just the weaving that can happen when we're talking about gentle action, that there are inspirations and threads that come forward, like when we yarn as Indigenous Australians, when we have conversations, we call it yarning. And that means that we're bringing threads together from each participant in the circle. And through those threads, where not one of us holds the ultimate authority, we generate something that is a more whole understanding. So historiography was one of the big, I guess, obstacles and challenges for the research in my PhD. So in my PhD, I was using René Girard's theory to look at the experience of encounter and reconciliation. So there was violence and reconciliation between both sides of my ancestry here on this place. But there was a dearth of records. And in fact, there was clearly an effort to erase records that would have kept the First Peoples' voice and perspectives and prayers, I guess, our intention for this beautiful country in place. And so as we recover and we go to those parts and bring them in, like the cornerstone rejected, as Jesus said, it becomes really the most important of the whole building of what we call Australia. This is a map that I generated with a collaboration with my friends at Newcastle University and mob. So when I say mob, I'm talking about family circles and clans who are connected to me by blood. And there are 40 markers that generated that cartography to just indicate for people looking, where is a Awabakal country? It's only about the size of Luxembourg, so it's quite a small place. And yet historically, it was quite pivotal because it's only 142 kilometres north of Sydney, which was the first place of contact in 1770 in a formal way. But then it became the place for the jail that the secondary offenders were sent to. And so Newcastle was one of the first places of important cultural experience in Australia, what we call Australia. And so just looking at the way that Girardian theory assists us in appreciating the peacemaking that's gone on our country, we can lean into the way that silenced voices are able to be heard by and through the thought of René Girard's perspectives and leadership in his thought. So with his perspective, the way that mimetic rivalry ends up with a scapegoating occurring for one person or for one group in a population leads to a way of isolating and excluding that group or that person, according to Girard's theory. That is also involved with what we call cultural relativity, which is where you have, I try to explain this to my students as being, it's who's who in the room. So it's like you go to a country pub, you're standing in the pub, and you know who comes from whose family, you know who's connected to who, you know who's married to who. But when that gets calcified and in place, to shift that cultural relativity, where do I fit in? Where does this person fit in? That can be very difficult. And that cultural relativity can hold some of these lies in place. And this, in our context, given it is such a young modern nation, so 250 years, the founding murder is still quite clear if we were to use Girard's theory, just to see that the massacres and the frontier wars are they're really very clear that they happened, but they're just not accepted in the cultural relativity of how we understand and relate to who we are as a culture. So this is some of the more recent work to do with telling that historiography. At Newcastle University, again, on country, the first supervisor for my PhD, Professor Lyndall Ryan, headed up a team who identified through stories, through call-ins on radio stations where people held the history, but it hadn't been recorded about massacres that had taken place. It sounds like I can talk about this with quite easy kind of immediacy yet. Given that some of this occurred to my ancestors, I can absolutely reveal to you that I did find appreciating or getting my head around what had happened difficult. So there was a real dissonance for me at understanding more and more deeply who Australia has been and who Australia is. And that's through the truth telling, which is recommended through the thought of Renee Girard. And it's part of what we call loving mimesis, because what we're doing is we're bringing forward a relational process. When there's a safety for a person or a party within a set of relationships to be able to be who they are. And so that's simply truth. That's just being true. And it's kind of like it's cultivated through the other or the group, intending for them, holding them in an energy, in an intentionality of safety and hope for them to flourish. That's what we call loving mimesis. And so that's when, instead of the energy of or the build-up of rivalrous tension, in contrary, this is the allowance of soft and gentle letting be, letting go. And so, as you can see, ripples in a pond, and I invite you throughout this presentation, you might want to read the words, you might want to hear what I say, you might want to look at the imagery. I hope that in some way that it speaks to you about each part of what we're delving into that is revealed in this relationship of Birrabban and Threlkeld. With Birrabban and Threlkeld, it really was and is that expression of a rippling that has had extraordinarily productive, creative, beautiful, holistic expression. So this is a map of Australia in its entirety, and this will give you a visual sense of just how many beautiful nations there were here and that are still here, and the pre-invasion that are First Nations mobs. So in this context, the Awabakal is just right over, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor at the moment. Can you see my cursor? Yep. So that's where we are located right now, and that's Awabakal country as it is, and Sydney is just a little bit south of there. The context in which Birrabban and Threlkeld existed from 1824 to 1842 was one that was very much marred by hostility and a pervasion of reckless taking. There was a very rapid and all-consuming bringing on of sheep and taking of land and pushing Indigenous Australians to the fringes, where their lives, our lives of millennia, were suddenly disrupted, where even food sources weren't even accessible. And in that context, the contrast of what happened with Birrabban and Threlkeld is immensely encouraging for our times. So if I begin at the end and then go back, and this is a typical Indigenous storytelling method, we start in the middle of stories, we start at the end. They left us, Birrabban and Threlkeld, translations of Gospels. They left us the earliest and most comprehensive record of any Indigenous Australian language. And they also brought forward an articulation of the anthropology of Awabakal people. And this was painstakingly recorded by Threlkeld, who I will show you in a little bit of time, has an incredibly pedantic approach and prolific approach to writing. His writing was actually something that became scandalous. And I use that word scandal in the Girardian way, where it was actually the middle of an embroiling storm in the colony. So just to invite a sense of what was going on elsewhere in the world. Of course, that was isolated from us from here because it's such a distance. And yet the British had invaded and were invading New Zealand, America, Canada. The British had treaties, had made hundreds of treaties elsewhere, but not a single one with Indigenous Australians. Not a single one. And this is vital for us to understand because of the importance of how Threlkeld held all First Nations people as equals. The forward impact of that in 2023 was that the Australian First Peoples asked the nation for a chance to have our voice heard on matters that affect us in this nation. And sadly, it didn't go through. It didn't get affirmed by the nation of Australia in a 60-40 vote. So a moment of hope actually turned to grief, and that misremembering, that amnesia to do with what and who is here in this nation, in this continent, again, found its problems. Birrabaan is the Awabakal word for the wedge-tailed eagle. And the wedge-tailed eagle is the totem for the whole of Southeast Australia. And by totem, I mean that the relationship with this particular species, and you know that Australia is a mega biodiversity, the particularity of this as a way for First Peoples to find a model of desire that helps them to live well together. That's really what the totem system's all about. So as we know, Birrabaan's name is the same as the word for wedge-tailed eagle, the totem. So what we have here is, the image of the eagle, and the inspiration for our First Peoples is that, to be able to connect with our native animals and our beautiful native forests to find inspiration about how to live well together. So in Australia, domestic violence is one of our most pressing issues. In this region, we have the highest rate in New South Wales, and therefore likely the highest rate in Australia. And this is a mirror of the nation's wounded relationship between its First Peoples and between non-Indigenous Australians. Because of the domestic situation here, where we have two parties distinct with non-Indigenous and Indigenous Australians, where one party will not acknowledge the personhood or the existence of the other and their voice, and yet we are kept within a continuation of and a confinement of that relationship because we're remote. That's why it's a macro expression there of what's going on in the domestic situations in Australia. And so the colonial experience being healed will be a step forward in us helping women, especially, to become free from those confined and difficult situations. So there is a fixation as well in Australia on property and ownership of property. And that is something as well that could easily be derived made a very clear line from our earliest contact together. And so when we address the truth of the reality of who we are to each other, then the maladies can be cleared. So to heal our future, we need to go back to our history. And it's all the more urgent because, as you can see here, 60% of the Awabakal native animals have been made extinct since 1770. And so, it's a very pressing issue. And this I can't breathe, that is something that in our documentaries in Australia is presented to do with the incarcerated, the last words of people who have been incarcerated, especially men, I can't breathe because of the force of the way they're being restrained. That issue is something that our native forest is crying out. Our koalas, our kangaroos are crying out. Yet with people listening to each other and bringing ourselves to weave and to riff from the gentle action and the trusting relationship where there have been positive models of loving, well, then we can find our way forward, because it's that heartbeat that will give us hope. And so we come back to that remembering, that bringing a connection into the body. So when we have a Eucharistic imagination, we have the imagination that we are one body. And when we hold ourselves as just one part of that body and we member ourselves in there, then we are able to, through our memory and through our relationships, coexist in harmony. And that's a cosmic vision, which is what Birubban carried. Australian Indigenous folk, we have a cosmology, we have a cosmosophy, which is what Stenner made as the nomenclature back in 1967, that we regard life and we regard our decisions when we hold the whole in the parts. The whole and the parts are connected. I'd like to draw your attention particularly to this phrase, this statement here by Threlkeld, which is actually a quote that references back to Isaiah. The mind of the black man is as capable of expansion as that of the white man, and he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth regardeth them both alike. So the he that sits upon the circle of the earth is God in this Isaiah reference. And what Threlkeld is imparting to us and to all who will listen is that we are equal. And this ridiculous claim of terra nullius, which is the Latin for no one living there, or the land without people, this ridiculous racist attitude and Darwinist attitude that Indigenous Australians were not as intelligent that as non-Indigenous people, Threlkeld was in the face refusing that, rejecting that, and justifying. He was saying that, you know, his experience and what his knowledge of Christianity told us is what he was telling through his proclamations like these. He recorded, "He is my daily companion, my instructor in his native tongue, and my friend, and in this wilderness." So yeah, it was a really harsh context for Threlkeld to come into. You know, like we have trees here that were 5 meters in diameter, and we had 3 meter deep oyster middens on the port. So it was a big environment, and a lot of the non-Indigenous here were very much threatened. But Birubban brought this loving relationship with the place to Threlkeld. So positive mimesis, like negative mimesis, is a contagion. And Threlkeld's way of holding and beholding Birubban, his mate, as someone equal to him and intelligent, was picked up by other explorers who visited the place at just near here, about 20 kilometers from here at Barabar. And when he spoke to when the explorers made records of having met Birubban, they said McGill was dressed in a red striped cotton shirt, not very clean, a pair of ragged trousers and an old hat. He had a brass plate, half moon shaped, suspended around his neck with a brass chain, and engraven with his English and native name, and a declaration of his kingly dignity. And towards the end, it says that his cheeks painted, or rather besmeared with ruddle, he is a very intelligent man and has been useful to L.E. Threlkeld in assisting him in the attainment of Aboriginal tongue. So the way that Threlkeld was operating was the way that his model operated, and that was actually a missionary to North America. And the last name of the gentleman was Brainerd, Brainerd. And the method was simply learn the language, then bring the gospel. And so this was the method that Birabaan was working with Threlkeld towards. So this next slide just shows that Birabaan carried Joseph, that's Threlkeld's son, through from Sydney to Newcastle, 140 kilometres, on his shoulders. And the trust of the father to the son in allowing him to be carried like that says a lot about the relationship. And there's just an example of the handwriting of Threlkeld and the way that he was very careful about the way that he met people, the politesse, the protocol. So between them, they were diplomats, they were doctors, they were evangelists and court translators. It was really important that Birabaan advocated for First Peoples at that time, because the courts up and down the coast would not listen to any of the Aboriginal testimonies, any of the Aboriginal people's testimonies. So when they were not, and the reason why they said that was because they weren't speaking English. And so Threlkeld, again, through exertion of energies that we can't imagine what it took from him, he went up and down the coast to represent Indigenous Australians in the courts. So despite the attempts to erase these stories, the waves of recovery continue, and the land itself keeps the archives, and Indigenous Australians in our cosmology and our poetry and our dancing, we sing up these stories and we remember them, and we fulfill that prayer that we do this in the same way that Birabaan and Threlkeld did it. So gentle action, in action, cultural respect and reciprocality. So I'm going to just introduce to you some of the ways that the threads of the mutually respectful relationship between Threlkeld and Birabaan is echoed in the art of modern Australia. In a short excerpt from the film Storm Boy, I'd just like to draw your attention to the ways that the small boy, Mike, who is known as Storm Boy, the small boy has such a trust with the pelican. The pelican is Mr. Percival, and he has lost his mother. And Storm Boy brings Pelican, Mr. Percival, back to life, because he was about to die without the nourishment of the mother, through feeding him fish. And so that relationship is something that Australians really connect to. This is actually one of our most cherished stories. So in the film, what we're looking at is a multiple generational demonstration of loving mimesis, where we have the way that Fingerbone Bill, who is the Indigenous Australian in the film, and by the way, this is one of the first times that Australian film ever included an Indigenous Australian in a positive role, in a positive kind of representation. Fingerbone Bill nurtures Storm Boy, even on the fringes of this society of Coorong. And from that, we have the imitation going through to his father, Tom, and a real resurrection of his spirit after the loss of the mother. And we see, again, a relationship of this example to the whole of the Australian experience to do with the Empire of Britain, and the way that losing the mother has made such a difficult transition and kind of suspended experience for us culturally. So finally, I'll just move down to this slide here to do with Stan Grant's presentation on Yinyamara. The link actually didn't work for me last night, so I won't go ahead and link it now, but I will refer to the Wiradjuri wisdom of Yinyamara Winangana. It means peaceful action. It means living in a world worth living in. And the way that we move to that is through quietness and through quiet strength. And it's a very beautiful gift to Australia and to the world. It's really, for now, it's a really important part of what we need in our times. So just one final example of what we have in our country as well is a new project to do with reconciliation, of bringing a Awabakal language into fusion with musicality from French monks who have been singing about reconciliation since World War II. And so we call that project Wayela Koa, which is a call to speak to one another. Yeah, that's in formation now. So we are hoping that that's going to be another expression of the beautiful relationships energy of Biraban and Threlkeld. So I'll finish off here just with the commentary about the romantic lie that Gerard speaks about is not present when we're doing truth-telling. When we're involved in truth-telling, we're bringing together all the voices, we're bringing together with respect onto a horizontal plane, people from all parts of the culture, and we're expressing what is that traditional feeling and intentionality from the Awabakal word. We call it pital, which is just love and peace from a Western point of view. Thank you.
January, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, and thank you, Felicity, for a wonderful presentation. I'm curious. You talked a little bit about Storm Boy, and I think we're going to be watching that for our Mimesis at the movies next month, so I'm excited for that. But I'm curious how you think stories like that can complexify our more standard narratives of, like innocent childhoods and take children's loneliness, grief, and moral agency more seriously.
Yeah, I think that the audience's response is a great guide to how important this is for Australia from a cherished point of view, not just because of the emotional layers, but because we can see there is such a response of affection towards this particular very simple story. We can draw from that there's many dimensions in it. It's not just that simple kind of child struggling through grief kind of motif that's operating in the text. There is an unconscious faithfulness that the author's giving us to do with a mirroring of how we're doing well and how we're not doing well. And I think that's in something like a fable like Storm Boy probably is, with its universal song. It's like a song line in Indigenous thinking, where it comes up from the earth and it gives us a calling. It gives us something that keeps on feeding us every time we see it, no matter how old we are. It's that kind of text that it is. And that's what makes it different from just a kind of a story that is in a very short period of time popular. And I think the reason why it works like it does is because of the humility of it, and the innocence of how transparent it is in speaking truth.
Okay, Peg, I think you had a question.
I don't exactly have a question. I just wanted to say thank you so much. This was very eye-opening. I guess it also makes me feel like, yes, there's a possibility that globally, maybe we will finally learn to live with one another in a positive way instead of a negative way. So thank you so much. As I say, it was very much an eye-opener, very much. Thank you.
Wow, Peg, thank you. The simple prayer that the men in the middle of this story, whose connections, of course, are deeply with women folk, and I should mention that the Awabakal tradition is a matriarchal one. It's our women who are the coroners. It's our women who find out what's going on and who's who and what's what. So through these, through knowing what is going on, how they've loved each other, it's really, it does give us courage. And I mean, in joining with their prayer, it's a real simplicity for me. And it's very humbling to hear your gratitude, because I just feel like I just said to, you know, my prayer last night, you know, Mary, through Jesus, you know, can you please help me to give expression to what the original intention between Birubaan and Threlkeld is. Let's honor that dreaming.
So Jude, please go ahead, unmute yourself, ask your question.
Well, first, I don't want to repeat everything Pat said, but Felicity, thank you very much. It's very new to me, and it's really an eye-opener. My question is this, is you said something like, first learn the language, then bring the gospel. I'm not sure if I am quoting you exactly here.
Yeah.
Of course, I have an idea of what you mean, but could you develop that and give us some example or guidelines? Because this applies to any meeting we have, any new meeting with people we don't know, to learn their language in the large sense of the word.
Yeah, it's a beautiful inquiry, Jude, because Australia is full of irony. And one of the ironies that happened here is that Threlkeld presumed that the language of the Awabakal was the language of the entire continent. But that's not true. There's about 340 different languages. God love him. And so that's why the Australian experience is so different from the Maori experience in New Zealand. They had one language, you know, it was a much simpler situation to negotiate treaties through, rah, rah, rah. So yes, a very, I guess, I haven't really questioned it. I just know that this is what Threlkeld was following, was this method of learning the language of the people and then bringing forth the Bible. And so the relationship for First Peoples has to be there before they'll give you the knowledge. So our whole pedagogy is based upon good, respectful relationships. And like I was only telling my students this yesterday in a local high school in Newcastle, I said to them, yep, I'm just getting a sense of whether you're going to respect when I give you some knowledge later in the lesson, but that's how it works. I can't give you the transmission of knowledge until I get the intuitive sense that you're going to be able to handle it and that you're going to respect it, you know. And that's how it is with the way that Threlkeld and Birubaan operated. There was never going to be a transmission of the amazing language of the Awabakal without that goodness in place between them. I hope that helps. Does that answer the question?
Yes, in fact, I was wondering why I was asking this question, why your sentence struck me. It's now I see why it's that in the history of our church, the Orthodox Church, there is the case of two saints who came to evangelize Slavic tribes in the south of Russia, it would be Ukraine today. And in order to do that, these people didn't have a writing system. And they brought them both the gospel, and in order for them to be able to continue to transmit it generation after generation, they gave him the Cyrillic writing system. But I like the fact that you mentioned it was a way for them to receive and transmit the goodness of the message, not the culture simply, but the goodness which is in it.
Yeah. Well, language carries philosophy. It's our whole sense of meaning in the world, isn't it? So therefore, for us to I guess, integrate a sense of meaning, we would need to understand the philosophy of the others that we're speaking with to generate some connection, some relevance and insight.
Vern, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Felicity. It was a joy listening to you. So one of the things you mentioned is that things that the Awabakal people and the Indigenous people generally in Australia are not thriving.
No.
refer
that's true.
to lateral violence and family violence and so on. And so if I take the position of somebody who's desiring the flourishing of the other, and in this case, the Awabakal people, what, from your perspective, what is the greatest gift, if you like, or what would be something that people who are well-meaning and are not Indigenous, what might they be able to do that would help enable the transformation and enhance the sense of dignity and capacity for loving action among the Awabakal people? You
That's
know,
beautiful.
what is
Yeah.
needed, and because sometimes other people somehow feel powerless, and a lot of people just keep their distance. But what would you really welcome? That's the first question. And the second question is maybe a little more straightforward. Can you give us an update on this Teze project? And could you even sing a line or two of the emerging chant that's coming out from Teze in Awabakal?
Thank you, Vern. Always a joy to be in communion and communication and generative dialogue with you. On the first question, relationship is it. Duncan Morrow, in his beautiful research in Northern Ireland using Girardian theory, has made it clear that without getting the relationship right first, there's no use making economic or policy changes between, for example, the Catholics and the non-Catholics, the Protestants in Northern Ireland. It just doesn't work. We need to work on the relationship so that there's trust. And then you know where to put the money. Then you know how to delegate responsibilities. So what you're about, Vern, always is this exceptionally beautiful modeling of relational goodness. And that's exactly what is important for First Peoples, because that trust is what will ultimately help us be seen. And when we're seen and we're visible and when our voices are heard, then we're able to be one of everybody. We belong. So that's really foundational. And all of the iterative changes as, we're in the 21st century and we've got different needs that are popping up all the time. The world's changing so quickly. That's the beauty of Indigenous Australians. We are so dynamic. That's how come we've been over 60,000 years of continuous civilization. So we're very good at adapting and changing. And the actual assistance, I guess, if you like, or the ways of helping, quote unquote, would be needing to dial in, be agile with what's going on accordingly, if that makes sense. One of the key things I see as really vital and why I love that you are all here is that we need the other who is international. It's really suffocating being just in Australia, where we're only seen by the other who is non-Indigenous Australia in this really tight kind of, I experience it as tight cultural relativity, where it's kind of like, we're in a position of constantly knocking on the door and the door not opening to our own house. It's so weird. It's so ironic, right? So in terms of the Teze, I hope that answers that part, Vern. Is that all right? Yeah, groovy. Okay. And the next part to do with how about I'm not a singer, Vern. I love music, but I couldn't do that to you all, to sing a song to you. But I will sing with you. Where we're up to is stage 2. With the monks and I have met twice now over there to do with the concept of the project, which is so in Hinduism, we have what's called sutras, which are threads of wisdom. And we are very close to, I'm not sure if you understand that, the Dravidian languages of South India are very close to some of the central Aboriginal Australian languages. So we know there's quite a distinct and clear philosophical and theological mirroring or connection there. Anyway, we've chosen the Beatitudes, which were translated by Threlkeld. We've chosen other phrases like, we two coexist peacefully. I know that that's one of our lyrics, and that's a Threlkeld and Biraban translation, that they've done that for me. They've taken the intellectual work out of it for me. But let me tell you, finding these phrases was like needles in haystacks because these records are still not very well organized and, you know, comparatively, but I'm so grateful to Neil Gunson for the incredible editing work he's done in bringing together the record that we do have. So yes, we're up to stage 2, where we are now meeting with Indigenous composers at the Australian National University later this month. There's a music outreach program there, and we're going to invite some of the composers to come with me and our project manager to France to spend time in residence with the monks there. And we're going to hopefully dream up and bring up some songs together. So yeah, and we'll go to the philanthropist to ask for some help with that.
Okay. I'm sorry, as you're talking, as you're going, you are just generating so many thoughts and ideas and comparisons that I rarely use it that I kind of put my hand up hoping the question would form itself by the time we got to my hand. But anyway, so maybe one thing because I don't know Australian history, although in talking, it's like I can just, mirror it from much of what has happened in the North America. But could you just explain a little bit what this utter resistance is to the recognition, never mind the acceptance, just the opening door to the recognition that there was a people. One thing I've noticed in the United States is, as bad as we're reverting, most of my contemporaries, and we have learned, oh my God, yes, there was these massacres, there were these things of the Indians. And then from a different point of view, because you've mentioned it when I saw you at the mini conference, but how is it that you found Catholicism, which obviously was not an indigenous religion, to be helpful on this journey?
Thank you, Ellen. They're very important questions. The articulation of how this non-recognition works is hard, because non-recognition in itself is it's an absence, right? So for me to find words for it is hard. It's based upon the Terra Nullius myth, where the British claimed that the earth wasn't being worked, that there was no work being done on the earth, and that completely misread the way that First Peoples have lived in fire managing the country, in farming the country, in building homes. It's all through the journals, but it was completely erased. They didn't bring it forward. So I'll give you the example of Pascoe. Pascoe is one of our recent Aboriginal Australian writers who's been scapegoated. He has brought forward a book about it's emu. It's to do with it's Dark Emu is the name of the book, and Dark Emu is a star configuration in our southern skies, and it mirrors for us how to manage the country. And he has gone through the journals of the early settlers, so-called, and he's brought forward the evidence that First Peoples absolutely worked this land before there was invasion by British. And yet he has been, the kind of vilification of him in the public space has been nothing short of violent. So there's a real hiding of Indigenous Australians. Our visibility is part of the, hiding from visibility is part of our survival. And so this is where pedagogy is so important, that we embed our curricula, we embed our knowledges and our histories and our cultures in the curricula of Australia. And going to how my Catholicity is a oneness with my Indigenous spirituality, it's the incarnational nature of Christianity, that Jesus Christ was born within the body of Mary, to me is a way of affirming the notion, the whole reality of this connection to country, and that God is the living heartbeat of this country. and being born again and again and again. And that's what gives me hope in this research and in national reconciliation, is that God makes all things new. And so through the deep Catholic theology to do with who Christ is, and the Trinity, and the real mystic sense of that, there's such a natural confluence with Indigenous spirituality, and I'm getting shivers as I'm saying that, so I know it's true. And I also get that sense of the way that the Holy Spirit was living and walking on this country way before the British got here.
Sure.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you
for
all
that.
time. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Robin, I think you're up.
I was recently, just last week, actually, just been listening to a little bit of David Bentley Hart, but then he was over in Australia, and there was did an interview with him and an Indigenous Aboriginal person, and three things stuck out to me that seemed to relate to what you spoke of. The first thing I remember he said was that before the missionary said we already had Jesus, it was already the equivalent in our culture. The second thing he said is that when it has in the beginning of John 1, in the beginning was the Word, where he said it's better to translate that as story, which makes sense because it's a lot fuller meaning in the Greek. I mean, the word is goes through the Latin translation, has very fixed categories. So it gets translated as word in Latin. When the Greek, it's a lot more dynamic. And the third thing he said was about, and this seems characteristic of cultures throughout the world, and particularly a lot of indigenous cultures, is he talked about in the context of totem and the many different clans, and how each had a totem, and the purpose of the totem, like I remember one was the crocodile, and it was all about harmony, and what each clan, it was like almost like what we think of as the body of Christ, represented by totems. And the whole purpose of these totems was to keep the harmony among the different peoples. And that, and then the idea of coming into cosmic harmony is the key. You find that in other, like in Chinese, in Taoism, and also Confucianism as it develops in the Neo-Confucianism, indigenous tribal societies in America. It's a very common theme. And it also was stressed there. It fits very nicely with the kind of Eastern development of Christianity, of us being expressions of the divine. And we're ultimately to be brought into a complete harmony as expressions of God. And so I was wondering any of those things to comment on how it fits with what you were talking about. It seemed to have a lot of similarities to it.
Yeah, Robin, I love the way that what you have said affirms a broad sense of who we are and the meaning of the heritage that we have in our distinct traditions, and how yet we're all one. So, I was just expressing to my students yesterday, my 18-year-olds who were looking at me going, wow, really? Because I was saying to them, diametrically opposed. Here's the British place here. Here's Australia. Now, of course, there's going to be different ways of thinking that are going to have come up from those soils over time. And that's part of the diversity of our earth, is it not? And so when we are engaging with an Eastern approach, we're enriching the Western and the Southern and the Northern. I mean, wouldn't we be impoverishing ourselves if we didn't? So yeah, there's such a deep sense of connection to do with totem we call it, well, it's protection really, where you're watching the numbers of that species and you're making sure that there is a particular flourishing to keep the balance correct. And I've got to share with you, Robin, that for me, the animal that's specifically a totem for our women, I had an aversion to people. It's on the menu for a lot of people, right? I couldn't eat it all my life, and I didn't understand why I couldn't eat it. It was the only thing. And then when more of my heritage was given to me, suddenly I got it. Oh my God, that makes so much sense now. You know, so these are choiceless choices. These are who we are. And it's not about policy. It's not about trying to prove who you are. It's just being true.
We're very grateful, and it's so relevant to what's going on, and the reversal that many in this country would have us do. You know, now that we've sort of admitted there were these other things, we're tossing the mentions out of the curriculum. We're tossing mentions of slavery out of curriculums. We're taking all language that refers to people being of different colors out of the curriculum. It's like now they're trying to put the genie back in the bottle, which you really can't. But I've had a bad day today. It's particularly horrifying for me.
Ellen, my heart goes to you on that. Yeah. It really is a time of misericordia, because in fact, accompaniment with our students as we attend to what we're learning, that's where it's at. It's not casting stuff out.
No, it's letting people know that this happened and how do we deal with it, right? It come to terms with it, you know. So anyway, Robin has his hands up. Good, you got in just the nick of time. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about this that, you know, I've been teaching ancient medieval philosophy this semester, really got into more of the figures and the idea of the right brain, and how the mystics really, they all consistently, whether West or East, articulate a view very similar to the kind of view of the universal harmony that you had discussed in relationship. And I particularly recently was reading about Nicholas of Cusa, which had that was very influential figure actually in the Western 1400s he lived. And how he thought everyone's diversity was, all the diversity was needed because it was different expressions of God, the infinite diversity of God. And then he was one of the first major ones to advocate interreligious dialogue because of that, which is very odd given his time, dialogue with Muslims. And, you know, because, so that was, and a more constitutional democracy. So that was very, very interesting, the kind of consequences. I think it's a sort of thing we all our deepest intuition sense that. And that's why it's so worldwide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we build up conceptual systems that could contradict it. And I'm not saying the building of conceptual systems are useful, but we've got to be very careful not to lose touch with these deeper relational realities you were talking about.
Yeah, and the genius of Jesus is this turning the other cheek, and that's something that René Girard draws a line under very strongly. Either we're going to learn this or we're going to blow ourselves up as a planet, is something that he was quoted as saying. I think it was in Violence and the Sacred. You're right in the sense of the diversity. You're right in what you're saying, Robin, and I'm just bringing together the sense of what Threlkeld and Biraban modeled. Even though Biraban had this cosmological vision, Threlkeld still had his Christian theology, and yet the lovingness continued and they walked together, you know? It wasn't that Biraban insisted that Threlkeld do it his way or the other way around. It was the relating that made the beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Felicity, for such a rich time and all your answers and thoughts. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm glad you were able to get on, and we went a little longer so that we would have the full time. So I just wanted to alert everybody to Theology&Peace has a mailing list if you're not on it, and we have all of these quarterly speaker series and other events on YouTube that you can find publicly. The mini conference is on YouTube now publicly. So thank you, everybody, for coming, and we hope to see you next month.